Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for remembering to align the time with Israel time. We are now embarking on our own story, Lech Lecha. This is where it's ours. It begins. It's our family. It's our. This is where we come from. Of course, we come from Adam, who comes made in the image of God. So the more particular origin, which is Avraham, still shouldn't make us forget that Avraham is also Adam, that he comes from Adam. And I want to just pick up something we talked about last week, just as a way of beginning, as launching into Lech Lecha. Aviv Adam shenivra b'tzelem. Now that's a very large view of the situation of Adam. Adam was created in the image of God, and therefore he is chaviv, and that's a word that will be preoccupying us. Chaviv. What is it to be chaviv? What is chiba? A certain kind of love, a lovableness, something to be cherished. Who is cherishing man? Chaviv Adam, clearly God. God created him in his own image because, or in order that he should cherish him. In other words, a certain sense of unspeakable intimacy, something that can't be explained in any other terms. That human being has some kind of strange and untranslatable intimacy with God. It's a relationship of familiarity, of almost being together, one, almost one. But remember how the Mishnah goes on. Chaviv Adam shenivra b'tzelem, chiba yetera. But extraordinary love, chiba yetera, exceeding love, is if someone is told, becomes aware, is given knowledge of having been created in the divine image. That is, it's possible to walk around the world, and generations perhaps have, not knowing that the image of God is somehow walking around with them, invested in them. But there's an intense quality of chiba, and I don't know if I want to just keep translating it love. Just leave the Hebrew word meantime. There's an intense quality of this essence in someone who knows about it, has been made to know in the passive form. It's not that he just found out somehow, but something has made him know it. Either God has told him, as in the case of Noach. Noach, we talked about him as the first person who really knew. Or perhaps in later generations, post-biblical generations, how does one ever get to know that one is in the image of God? Well, it's a kind of open question. I don't have very clear answers to that, but there could be any number of happenings in the world, in oneself, that make one know that somehow make one aware. And this can be a chiba yetera. And I'd like to emphasize a little perversely, but that's always the way I like to read. It's not necessarily a sweet thing, this chiba yetera, exceeding love, because yetera can sometimes mean excessive. That there's a kind of too muchness, right? This is an expression I used already last week, and I want to use more today. There's almost a sense of too muchness, of excessiveness, of that experience of knowing because somehow life has made you know, or something has happened, of knowing that you are in God's image. Now, that already makes this it's a phenomenological structure that we're talking about here. What is it like to be a human being who knows that he is in the image of God? Now, this combination of lovableness and knowing, I want to remind ourselves that at a certain point in the story, it's considerably later in the story of Avraham, but I'll put it in right here now before we launch into Lech Lecha. God actually says about Avraham, it's chapter 18, verse 18, verse 19. Verse 19. God says about Avraham before the story of Sodom, Ki yida'ativ, because I know him. And the fact that I know him, Rashi translates knowing as Lashon Chiba. Knowing means love. It means already this kind of love. That is, I already love him, right? As if that comes first. Rashi then says, anyone who likes someone else, it's not necessarily erotic love, it's just a certain sense of liking. What can I do? This person is dear to me. He may not have earned it, but this person, it's almost like myself. So that is a sense of then wanting to get to know him more. That is, it's a certain kind of knowledge. And Rashi says, anyone who likes a person, mekarvo leida oto v'lehakir oto. It sounds very simple. If you like someone, you go and talk to them. You go close to them, you bring them close to you, you invite them for dinner because you want to get to know them better. So the love and the knowing have a strange relationship with each other. That the love seems to come first, and yet clearly the knowing leads to more love and more desire to know. And somewhere there's something mutual about this. The person whom you are bringing close to you is also in some sense sharing in this increased intimacy. Somewhere there is an intimacy being set up that where love plays a role, a certain paradoxical role. So it's not just that one starts with a certain coup de foudre, it's like the flash of falling in love. It's not that kind of thing. It's just you see someone and somehow I like this person. And then you want to, not necessarily to base that love, but just the love makes you curious. One of the phenomena of love is curiousness. I want to know more. And that has a great deal to do with the way God loves Avraham, and Avraham loves God. And that's kind of play that I want us to keep in mind as we move on. If you've looked at your source sheets, you've seen that there's a lot of artwork involved in the source sheets. I hope we get to it, and I hope it's useful to us. Meantime, let's just start with the text. So there is this confusion, as it were, about knowing meaning loving, Rashi says. Vayeda Adam et Chava ishto. Yeah, Adam knew his wife. Clearly, that means union, yeah, sexual union. But it doesn't have to be erotic love. It can be, love another person, someone who is other, not you, and yet you enter into this chiba relationship. If you look up the word chiba, chaviv, it's all very intriguing. It means preciousness. It means to embrace. Lechavev can mean to embrace. It can mean to wrestle. Now, can you take that on board? It means actually to be so close to someone that sometimes you don't know whether you're hugging them or wrestling with them. There's a certain, it's too much. There's a certain too muchness. Like sometimes when one hugs a child, one is in danger of hugging too hard. You have to hold back somewhere because there's something it's welling over about it, and it can also express some kind of perhaps unconscious, who knows what, unconscious hostility. This other person is still other to me. If I can spoil the romantic picture a little bit, there's an intensity. That's really what I want to say. There's an intensity of relationship, which includes the wrestling possibility. Actually, an expression that's used in the Tosefta, chovavin, meaning to wrestle, to fight someone. So it's a complicated expression, and it's going to be used now in our text here, in Rashi, for instance. But first of all, let's go back to Lech Lecha, go back to our story, and look at number 1 on your page. Number 1 on your page. Yes, God says to Avram, and everyone has noticed this, and Rashi has a famous comment on it. We'll have a look at it right away. God said to Avraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha mi'moladecha u'mibeit avicha. Very detailed, circumstantial description of what he's to leave behind. He's to leave behind his country, his birthplace, his particular town, perhaps, and his own family, let's say. intense, getting more and more intense as we go on. So it's very clear what he's to leave and where he's to go. Isn't that an important piece of information when you ask someone to go on a journey? In a way, it's more important than what he has to leave. God doesn't have to really spell out what he's leaving, but where he has to go is left up in the air. Ela aretz asher areka. Now, why does God dangle in front of Abraham his destination? Is it a kind of game of some kind? What is Abraham supposed to do with this piece of information? This is the first time God has spoken to him. It's his initiation. It's his first acquaintance with God. And I noticed that this year more. I don't think I ever noticed it before. Very simple. There's no mention of God appearing to Abraham. It's not that God appears and then says. That's the usual form. And you're going to have it just 7 verses later, Pasuk Zayin, when he actually arrives in the land of Canaan. It only takes 7 verses in reading time to get there, but who knows how long he was actually traveling. That's open. We don't know. When we get there, Vayera Hashem el Avram Vayomer. There God does appear. Avram sees something. He's however you want to understand that. He envisions something. He has a vision. There's some kind of perception going on here. And then God says to him, "You've arrived. L'zeracha natati et haaretz hazot. I told you I would show you, so now I'm showing you by showing you myself." Notice, for the first time you're in that degree of relationship that's called seeing. I don't imagine it as literal seeing. And for the first time now he knows his destination. Why? How does he know? Because he's there. Only when he gets there does God, in a way, corroborate what perhaps is a feeling that he has in himself, which is that this must be the place. Somewhere he's traveling from one place to the other, and he gets to this place, and then God says, now, let's start by assuming that he doesn't know till God tells him. Why did God keep him in suspense till now? Have a look at Rashi. And I'm going to just very quickly run through a couple of passages here on Rashi, very, very well known. I'm sure you know them. Lech lecha. First of all, the opening command. Lech lecha. Go. What's lecha? So Ramban will say, characteristically, it doesn't mean anything. That's his first assay. Lecha is just a kind of, I think it's called an enclitic in Greek literature, Greek theory. It's just to give weight to the sentence. Brach lecha, flee to yourself, go to yourself. It's not really, it's nothing to do with yourself. It's just get going. It's a certain momentum of movement. Lech lecha, go. That's nothing. No, Rashi doesn't go for that. Rashi, midrashically, cites the midrash, l'hanaatcha u'letovatcha. It will be for your benefit and for your good. You won't lose out by this journey. Normally, look at the next passage in Rashi, the next paragraph. Normally, traveling actually is quite costly in terms of what? You lose 3 things. In terms of fertility, in terms of your bank balance, and in terms of your capacity to become well known in your world. If you travel a lot, then you're not going to be able to build up a good bank balance. You're not going, assuming in ancient ideas of traveling, not traveling to make money, but traveling, nomadic traveling. If you keep moving in that way, you won't be able it's not good for fertility. You need to be settled, live a quiet, normal life. You'll be always bouncing from pillar to post. So these 3 things, it'll cost you. And so Rashi reads Lech Lecha as God reassuring Abraham about these brachot, about these blessings. I am now blessing you in these 3 specific areas that you will not be the loser. So, in other words, don't worry. You're not going to lose through this journey, which is a slightly odd way to begin the Lech Lecha idea. The Zohar, rather differently, translates Lecha as Legormecha Uletikuncha. Start traveling, and it will create you and bring you out into fullness. It will draw out of you what you have in you. Tikkun. What you have now is just raw material. You have the raw material of a self. It needs tikkun, and it actually needs ligrom. Ligrom basically means to become yourself. You will need to find a way of becoming yourself, and that's what this journey is all about. The journey basically, for the Zohar, and the Kabbalistic sources, is not a matter of just get there. One way or the other get to Eretz Yisrael, and that's where everything will be good. It's really the journey that is the issue. Getting there, well, you'll see, you'll find out when you get there where you are and what it does for you. Meantime is the journey itself, what it does to you. That is, in a way, God is saying to Avram, taking the Zohar and to some extent Rashi into account, he's saying to Abraham, destabilize yourself. Here you're well stabilized in your family, in your immediate society, in your national identity. You have all the forms of validation around you, all the social validations that give you legitimacy, that you really belong in a real world. Leave all that behind. Leave, in other words, almost like leave yourself behind. But the paradox is that's how you will create or discover yourself. Now, this sounds almost too modern, sounds almost a hippie, a hippie project. Neville Symington, who was one of the British 20th century psychoanalysts, has a nice sentence that I want to quote here. He says, "It is what is most deeply me that has to be created." I'm thinking now, let's say, of a young person. But as we'll see as we go on, it doesn't end with youth. It's something that's a lifelong task. But we usually associate it with youth. That what's most deep in this young person has yet to be created. So the young person, the subject, has to find a way of getting not only to know himself, but to bring herself into being. And another sentence in the same vein, I can only truly know that which I have created. Now, these are challenging claims. I can only really know what I have created. What someone else has created and put down in front of me, I can't really know. It's only when I have some sense of I'm involved in the knowing of this person, in the making real of this person, that I can know them. Otherwise, they remain to me all too obvious in a sense. Oh yeah, that person over there. But once I begin to be intermeshed with them, once I begin to be entangled and get to know them intimately, then I know that to some extent I'm creating them. I have skin in the game. I'm to some extent creating them, and that's what it is to know. Just like God created the human being in his image, right? And that is the sense of intimate knowledge. Understanding comes when something within the personality receives attention. Again, Symington. That's when understanding begins about oneself. Now, for Rashi, then, this is a journey that has to be undertaken. The result will be that you will become a blessing for all the families of the earth. And then finally, we get to this mysterious, the end of number 2, Asher Areka, go to the land which I will show you, and Rashi's reading of it. Rashi says, Lo gila lo haaretz miyad, famously. God did not reveal to him Eretz Yisrael as his destination immediately. Lo gilalo. That is, I think Rashi is saying that what God is saying to Abraham, it's a paradox in itself. God is giving Abraham information here. He's not just not saying the destination. He could just have said, leave everything you know and travel. But God is telling Abraham, you will not know where you're going till you get there. Now that's a different thing. Now it's in Abraham's mind. It's not just in God's mind that the information is withheld. And so Abraham now knows that he doesn't know what he really wants to know. Quite important to know. Where am I going? What direction do I go in the morning when I get up? North, south, east, or west? Not a clue. You want to take it like that. And then Rashi goes on to the word chaviv, chiba. And he says, why did God leave him in the shadows like this? In order to give him reward for every expression that God uses. That is, every time that God says to him, yes, you know, what he is to leave exactly, every time God speaks to him, he gets a reward for the not knowing where he's going. You have another example of this sort of structure of God holding his object, right? God holding a human being in suspense. When God says to Abraham at the end of the story, Kach et bincha et yechidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak. And there it becomes almost too intense, because Rashi wants us somewhere to carry over into that delaying. Take your son, your only one, whom you love, Yitzchak. Why does God not tell him right away, take Yitzchak? In order, how does Rashi put it here? Latet lo schar kedei lechabeva be'inav. In order to make it precious in his eyes, in order to make the receding object, the object that is enveloped in mystery, right? To make it precious to Abraham. Now, I can understand perhaps that if his destination is not revealed to him and he has to travel with incomplete information, I can understand that then his mind would be constantly working around. So where is it I could be going? What? And one would be imagining and hypothesizing, and perhaps this and perhaps that. And in that way, one's mind would be tangled up with one's destination. One would be involved in thinking about the issue of where am I going, much more than if God just told him, go to Eretz Canaan. That piece of information Avram could have tucked away and no trouble at all, because after all, his father was heading towards Eretz Canaan at the end of last week's Parshat, and so the whole family was traveling in that direction anyway. But they happened to stop somewhere on the way, and they settled down somewhere on the way. That's what the Torah told us last week. So it would be only natural for Abraham to have God tell him, leave now everything you've meantime, all your whole world now, and go off to the land that you were supposed to be going to in the beginning. Okay, but the fact is that God deliberately doesn't tell him, and the idea somewhere would be that it's his mind being involved in the mystery is what makes the question of Eretz Yisrael, or the destination, part of himself. That it's a way of knowing himself. I begin to be aware of what I'm thinking of when I think of my destination. Could it be this? Could it be that? It's not just that God is telling me the obvious. If God is telling me the obvious, I don't have to pay any attention to it. It's so obvious that I don't have to pay attention. But if God is in a way giving me incomplete information, that intrigues me and involves me and makes me want to know more. Incomplete objects. It's a famous observation by Ernest Gombrich, the art historian. We're heading towards the artwork. That Rembrandt's eyes, when Rembrandt painted self-portraits, actually, the eyes were always in the shadow. The eyes are the most expressive part of the face. The face is the most expressive part of the body. And somehow he always paints the eyes in shadow, as if to draw the viewer into the painting. I want to get closer. It's that instinct of wanting intimacy, which is encouraged by the shadow, by shadows, by not being given clear information. It's sometimes better in terms of a relationship if some things are hidden. Some things, you will find out at the right moment. A little elusive, in terms of building a relationship. And God wants Abraham to have a relationship with Eretz Israel. That's what Rashi, I think, is really saying. Have a look now at the Mir Shiloach in number 1. 19th century Hasidic master, El Haaretz Asher Areka. This is very intense language, and it's language about Abraham's, never mind the physical journey. What was his religious desire? What was his desire that had to do with the fate of his own soul? Where he wanted to be and go in the world? El haaretz asher areka. Abraham Avinu alav hashalom, haya godel chukato leda, had a great desire to know, we're talking about knowing, to know makom dvekut chiyuto etzel Hashem yitbarach. This is not easy language, very intense language, Kabbalistic language. He wanted to know the exact place in himself where he would be able to find dvekut, a connection, an intimate connection. I'm translating hectically here. I'm trying to bring this closer. He wanted to know the place in himself where he could find a place of connecting his vitality with God. That is, to connect his own sense of aliveness, as we like to say now. And I want to translate it like that. He's thinking again of a young person who is very much alive and has a sense that he would like, there's an aspiration of some kind. Put it very simply, to find God. But what does it mean in terms of what's the experience like? The experience would be to find a place in myself that would connect, to find a situation, a posture for myself in which I would feel connected with God. I would feel, so it's a question of the place in a spiritual or psychoanalytic sense. On what could I base some kind of real connection with God? And that God answers him then, Amar lo Hashem yitbarach el haaretz asher areka. I know what you want. I know what your deepest desire is. And this is really quite a probing, it's a penetrating answer. I know what you want. You'll find it. El haaretz asher areka. That is, dvekatcha yeh b'makom hanikra asher areka. You will find that place of connection in the place that's called, which I will show you. That is, you'll find a place of connection with God in a place that's not a place, it's not a thing. It's something that has about it shadows, something that allows you to explore, allows your vitality, your aliveness to explore and to interact, and in some way to create a relationship. It'll bring you out. It won't just land on top of you and engulf you, the experience of God, but in some way, there'll be a certain play, there'll be a certain interplay. And that is the land which I will show you. Ein lo sof, because that place has no end. Don't ever think you will have arrived. Now I know the place in myself where I meet God. It's not going to be possible to think that way. It's going to be a lifelong quest. Somewhere it's always going to be that sense of, so where do I turn now? What am I looking for at this point of my existence? Ein lo sof, b'chol pam yitrabeh lecha yoter v'yoter ha'arot. At every moment of your life, constantly, it will be yielding for you more and more insights, ha'in sof baruch, insights about the Blessed One, the Infinite, blessed be He. That is, it's a way of knowing God that is a process, putting it very simply. And it's a process. It won't be one huge revelation. It'll be Vayera here and Vayera there, and many Vayeras in the story of Avram. He's constantly moving. He has his name changed at one time. He has to circumcise himself. He has to change. His body is full of happenings. I'm sorry, his story is full of happenings. His body too, yes. His body has to undergo at least one major thing. But God is, it begins with a generalized desire on the part of Abraham. God says to him, Lech lecha. That's what it's really all about. And the Mea Shaloach wants us to understand that that's really what Abraham is in quest of. He's in quest of some kind of self revitalization, bringing himself to full life, finding a way of bringing himself to full life, which will mean a connection with the infinite. And it will never be a sense of settling down. It will never be a sense, oh, now I found it and I know exactly what I have to do, and end of story. It will always be Asher Areka. And that's why that opening pasuk of the Parsha remains so resonant for us to this day. Now, the idea of the knowing, the relationship with God as yielding insights that are new constantly. Constantly one finds new insights. That's a classic, of course, experience in learning Torah. Learning Torah is one way of knowing God. It isn't a purely intellectual activity. It's an excitement. It's an enlivenment. It's a sense of, I have a hara. Suddenly there is an insight of some kind. And the insight is about human life, and human life as it touches God, as it's somehow touched with the divine. And it has to do with being B'Tselem. It has to do with being in the image of God, B'Tselem Elohim. But the image is not a thing. It's not, something concrete. Gaston Bachelard, the French philosopher who loves to talk about imagery, says that a stable and complete image clips the wings of imagination. There is no image of God. Images, an actual thing, would clip the wings of imagination and of spirituality, of the capacity to go on growing, to go on imagining, but in the largest sense. And so what you have is something unstable, Asher Areka. That's the place you are where you will find the Asher Areka means basically on one level, it means every time one starts the Torah anew. Every time you start the Torah anew and you start, traveling and exploring, a certain way of looking at reality and looking at the text begins to become clear. And it's not one way, but it's at least two ways of paying attention. Now let's have a look very briefly at your art material. Do you have it there in front of you? You got it? Okay, so I won't hold it up because it'd probably be even more blurred if I hold it up. So I'm looking, first of all, and mainly at this sheet. Okay, so I'm looking very quickly. I don't want to spend a lot of time in it. This is all from Anton Ehrensweig's book, The Hidden Order of Art. And I've included his little comments on the illustrations there, so you can get some idea if you're willing to spend the time. So the first one is a cartoon, right? It's a caricature, and it's a caricature of a character who has all kinds of moods. Yes, his moods of apprehension, depression, and high spirits are expressed by the various positions of his eyes. You expect to find the eyes on top of the nose, right? You know exactly where eyes should be. And if you look at him, it turns out that his eyes are on his nostril. That is all wrong. It's all out of place. Eyes don't belong on the nostril. But if you are looking at the image with the right level of distance, of not focusing on what's absurd about it, but just looking at it as a whole, you suddenly realize that his nose is smiling, that this is an image of a happy man, with his eyes smiling on his nose, because the nose, of course, all takes part in a smile, obviously. Now, isn't this a mess? You can start off by saying, well, this is a messy, distorted way of conveying something simple. Can't you just give him a smile in the normal way? But there's something extremely expressive about this, is what I want to suggest. The nose also smiles when one smiles. There's no question about that. But we normally have a very firmly gestalt view of things. Right? We want to know what is the figure and what is the ground, what is important in the picture and what is less important. So we emphasize the eyes, let's say, and the eyes are separate from the nose, and the nose is less important. Here, it's the other way around, or it's mix it up together, and you end up with a sense of the happiness of this man in a very almost, again, loving way, right? You are familiar with this image. It does something to you as a normal image wouldn't do anything to you. An image of a smiling person. It gets to you. It gets under your skin. Okay. Distortion. Look at the long image, Giacometti's elongated figures. Why on earth? Next to it, the comment at the top of that figure refers to an image I didn't include, which was simply a drawing of the same figure, not a sculpture. So when Giacometti drew the figure, it looks like a normal, realistic image of a man. He's rather tall, and he's sitting there, I think, with his legs crossed, a normal image. And so the comment Ehrenzweig makes here of the standing woman, all right, it's a woman, it's not the same image, that he's strained towards absolute truth. It's a strain. If you really want absolute truth, you're not going to be content with the nearest convenient image. What is stable and complete, so don't have to think about it. So he's straining somewhere. There's chibayetera. There's a kind of tension in his attention. Attention is stretching yourself out towards something, tendery, to stretch yourself. And for these artists who play with a distortion, there is that sense of strain, tension of some kind. I want to achieve in a way something impossible. He's strained. His extremely elongated sculptures come true. They begin to look true if you accept that vertical scanning can be done quickly, while traversing the figure's thickness is slow. Now, there's an interesting way of looking at it. You can do this very fast. You can take in this figure very fast. But once you've got, you just zoom from the bottom to the top. You don't get delayed on the way because there's nothing to look at. It's just there's only the top and the bottom. And suddenly you've taken it in at almost unconscious speed. Whereas if you have a detailed, realistic sculpture, let's say, then you take in its thickness. You look at this detail and that detail. Here's somewhere you take it in one, and that has a certain sense, carries with it a certain sense of getting at the truth of the matter. Something that your unconscious is involved in, not just your conscious, obvious, surface knowledge. Something you're getting at something about this figure, the fact that he's so very long. It's a matter of speed and time. Have a look at, yes, very important, the one at the top of the page. This one I like very much. This is the double profiles by Rubin. The two faces try to kiss each other, but cannot do so. As the eye focuses on one, the other disappears. Do you see what they're talking about? If you decide that the right-hand person is really there and the rest is the ground, and the ground disappears, the ground's not important. The important thing is the right hand. Or you can do it for the left and suddenly switch it. Okay. But the artist, when he drew it, obviously held both in his mind. And he drew freely. Somewhere he knew how to, drawing on unconscious motivations, unconscious life, percepts. He knew how to just go and end up with two figures that can be read either one way or the other, or in an interesting experiment done by a New York psychoanalyst, whose name is, will come back to me at some point. He tried showing people this image subliminally. That means with a split-second exposure of a film, of a camera. That is, people are watching a screen, and in a split second, the image appears and disappears, so that consciously they don't see it at all. That's fast, talking of fast, speed. And when they were asked afterwards to draw what they had seen, they didn't leave the page blank. Many of them drew two faces looking at each other. Not in the way of this, but two actual faces looking at each other. That is, we take in, of course, unconsciously much more than we realize. And you can affect people by these split-second images. That it has a part in the unfair use of unconscious attention. But here we're talking about something very powerful, which I want to make use of in thinking about Abraham and in what the Midrash does with the Lech Lecha moment. The moment when Abraham tries to achieve some kind of knowledge of himself. I'll leave the artwork aside for the time being and come back to the text here. Abraham, what is his situation at the moment of Lech Lecha then? Ramban, in number 3, on that expression, he traveled to the land, he is to travel to the land which I will show you. Ramban says this is not an instant. He doesn't get there fast. In the Torah, he gets there in seven verses. But in this case, in the case of real time, Haya noded v'holech migoy el goy memlacha el am acher. This was a very long odyssey. Abraham is, the Yiddish expression, verblonging around. He is going here, going there, this country, that country. Navanad, noded v'holech. He is like a fugitive and a wanderer. You use the word noded, which comes from Cain, of course. Ramban is here subliminally affecting you by using the word noded. You remember somewhere that was the curse of Cain, that you will be a navanad. You'll be a restless wanderer without a purpose, without knowing where you're going. There'll be something about a troubled, confused sense of life. Your vitality won't know what to do with itself. Your being won't know in what to invest itself. No dead until you arrive at the place where God said to him, to your seed I give this land. And that's when to the land which I will show you was fulfilled. Okay. And so he settled down in this land. Although up to now, he didn't really know where he was going to go. He just headed towards Canaan in a general way, but he really didn't know where he was going at all. And then the Ramban finishes this. You might wonder, so why is this important? To know that he didn't know. Why is this important? And look at the last line of the Ramban. And because of this, Amar vayhi ki asher hit'u oti Elokim mi beit avi. Later in chapter 20, Abraham will talk about this early period of his life to Sarah. And he'll remember that God made me travel all over the place from my father's house. Right? Recalling the Lech Lecha command. The beginning of my life with God was a matter of to'eh, hit'u. To'eh, it's not with a tet, it's with a taf, which means to wander, and it means really to go astray. Right? So somewhere it's a little like a tet, ta'ut. It means to be mistaken, not to know whether one's right or wrong, to be where one is, to have to be waiting somewhere for God's corroboration. No, it's not here, it's not here, it's not here. There's a sense of confusion. And Ramban, deliberately, I assume, is making us aware of that word hituoti, which describes Abraham as a living question mark, right? If we were to draw Abraham in a Giacometti mode, he would be a long, long figure as a question mark. That's his life. That is his vitality. His aliveness finds itself only in that experience, in this period of his time, of his life. And in order, as if to add coal to this fire, Ramban ends with these last few words, Ki haya to'eh kase oved, because he was wandering around like a lost lamb. Now, wandering around like a lost lamb, first of all, that's a very evocative image. That's an image that, again, it provokes your imagination. It doesn't just say something, oh yeah, I understand. He had to go through all this country and that country to get to Eretz Canaan. I get the geography straight. It's something about Abraham's subjective life. That Abraham is trying to create himself. Right? And all he knows up to now is a kind of lostness and confusion and not knowing where, like a lost lamb. And add to that what Ramban is doing here is referring to the last line in Psalm 119. Psalm 119 is the one that's according to the alphabet, the one that's said in funerals, Haskarot, in which you have to find the name of the person. You put the name of the person according to the number of the alphabet, the letter in the alphabet, and then you read those verses from Psalms. Right at the end, under the letter Taf, you have there Ta'iti Kaseh Oved. I was wandering like a lost lamb. That's David HaMelech, according to tradition, yeah, who's describing himself. I've been wandering like, this is his existential situation, wandering like a lost lamb, Bakesh Avdecha. And the plea to God, find your servant. That is, help me find my bearings. If you find me, it's almost as if I'm lost, then I feel that you're lost. I've lost you and you've lost me. Please find me. So the plea to the shepherd to find the lost sheep. So there's something very powerful and reflexive about this, if you know what I mean. Ramban wants us to understand something about Abraham's subjective situation and also about his relation to God, that God in some way has lost him, as it were. And God has deliberately sent him on this perverse quest, a quest in which he won't know till he knows. Okay, now let's come to number 4. And here we are more coming to ground. Number 4. God said to Abraham, Lech Lecha. And from now on, we're going to have material that addresses the expression Lech Lecha. Rabbi Yitzchak began to teach, quoting from the book of Psalms, Shim'i bat uri'i, listen and look, O daughter, pay attention. I need your attention now. Listen and look, use your senses. Hati oznech, incline your ear, right? Attention. Bend forward. V'shikchi amech ubet avich. And forget your people and the house of your father. Now, in the Torah, it says you should travel physically away from them. The Midrash, what does the Midrash do? It says it's not just physically travel away, but create a situation in which you are ready to pay attention to something else, and you are actually forgetting everything that used to be your world. But in some way, there's a kind of distortion again. In artistic terms, you are making what used to be the figure of your life into the ground. That will now become the background, the unimportant part of your life. And now focus your attention on what is to come. And you don't know what is to come. So how can you focus your attention on it? So there is that sense of suspense. In the book of Psalms, this verse is describing a bride who is to leave home, everything she knows, and particularly the house of her father, And I can't help hearing a slightly Oedipal note there. That is, she's to move away and, as it were, blot out, take away from the center of attention her love for her father. That quality of love, that is being displaced now by something else, by the future. And that is the bride who doesn't know her husband, doesn't know who she's going to marry. I mean, she may know his name, but she doesn't know him. And so that is the kind of tantalizing situation, that kind of poignant situation of neither here nor there, transitional situation that Avraham is in. And the Midrash deliberately gives us these associations of a bride who doesn't know her husband. Or it's a very fraught situation Avram is described as being in. When we get to that point, suddenly the Midrash breaks off, and we have a different one of the Chachamim, Rabbi Yitzchak, taking us in a different scenario. It's somehow an interruption. We'll get back to this bridal journey, to the journey of the bride at the end of the Midrash. But first of all, it's a kind of aside here again. Our attention is distorted, is displaced. First of all, we were with the bride, and now suddenly, no, here's something else. Pay attention to this. It's like Rabbi Yitzchak, it's like someone, echad. There was one person, a singular person, who was traveling from place to place. Over mimakom lemakom. He's a traveler, and he keeps going from one place to another place. And then that word makom reminds me of the first source, the Mea Shiloach, that his great desire was to find the place of connection between him and God. So this traveler is traveling from one place to the other, and they're all meaningless. There's nothing works. From here to there, he's confused. In the end, he's just suffering from some kind of confusion. And suddenly, Ra'ah bira achat doleket. Ra'ah. Suddenly he sees something. And it's as if his routine wanderings, kind of meaningless wanderings, were just the material. It was just the flow of everyday life. You get up, you do the same things every day, and then at a certain point of the day, you don't remember, did I actually do that? Have you ever had that happen? I think it gets more common as you get older. I'm constantly asking myself, in the sequence of things I've just done, did I remember to do X? Was X actually there? Because I wasn't thinking about it, wasn't paying attention. Suddenly, he's interrupted in that kind of half daze by something he sees. Ra'ah. Attention. A building, a castle, apparently, according to scholars say, is like a tenement building. A building with many houses in it. Bira achat doleket. So let's translate doleket, on fire. There is an alternative translation, which I'll just mention, but I won't follow that today. It is sometimes understood as he sees the castle all lit up. And he asks the question then, Tomar, bira hazu below manhig. Could you say that this castle or this tenement building is without anyone in charge? There's no one looking after it. There's no one in charge. Would you say that? Now, following doleket as meaning the castle is on fire, he's asking, would you say, but isn't it probable, wouldn't it be very likely, plausible, that no one is in charge? No one seems to be paying attention. No one's putting out the fire, right? Nothing is being done about it. And so it's a very disturbed question. It's a question that comes from a vision of the world, a certain way of seeing the world. The world is on fire. Everything is wrong with it. There's a great deal wrong with the world. And no one's doing anything about it. Hitzitz alav balabira. The owner of the castle then peers out at him. Turns out that there is someone in charge. And he turns out and he hitzitz alav. Very, very, very particular word, midrashic word, hitzitzata. It's not just he looks at him, he bitila, he just glances at him. There's a kind of spark of vision. Some energy comes out of the eyes of the owner and meets Avraham. He tzitz alav, and he says to him, Amarlo, Anihu balabira. I am the owner of the castle. Right? Here I am. And then, and then the Midrash goes on to translate that into Avraham's experience, because Avraham said, would you say that this world is without anyone in charge? And God peered out at him, God glanced out at him, and said to him, I am the owner of the castle, Anihu Bal Ha'olam. Now, that's a self-contained unit, the story of the traveler and the castle and the owner of the castle. It starts with someone traveling. It's not paying particular attention to anything. All the makomot seem the same. Nothing is drawing his attention. And then suddenly something draws his attention. He sees this burning castle. And almost in the very act of seeing, there comes the question, which is a question about confusion. It's a question about nothing being in charge, about disorder. It's a terribly disordered world. And perhaps I myself am in disorder. I don't know I don't know where to put myself. I don't know how to put myself into the world. But what the Midrash then does is return to the original story of the bride. Right? So you have the bride, right? In the story of the bride is embedded the story of the traveler. It's a very unusual strategy, because the verse in Tehillim carries on then, after telling the bride to pay attention and to look and to hear. V'yitav hamelech yofiech, and the king will desire your beauty, because he is your Lord, hu Adonayich. You will call him my Lord. He will be your husband. There's a gender situation here. He will desire your beauty. The bride is suddenly being made to know, before she knows it personally, that at the end of the journey, there will be a relationship, and it's called marriage. It's marriage to someone there will be desire. She will be desired, which is, again, unknown territory. She has never experienced anything like that yet, at least not consciously. Right? There will be that sense of knowing and being known. And Liapoter ba'olam, the Medrash comments, not just that he'll desire your beauty, but he'll desire you, Avraham, to make you beautiful in the world, to mark you with value in the world, so that everyone will see you, everyone will pay attention and notice that there's something singular about you, that you've gone through a certain experience, that in some way you will speak to them. They'll be affected by you. Now, that is, the Midrash is making a huge affair of Vayomer Hashem el Avram, Lech Lecha. Just those words. God said to Avraham, is some voice speaking to the bride and telling her to ready herself for a new kind of relationship, which is all in shadows at the moment. She can't see it. She has nothing to base her imaginings on. So there she is in that kind of transitional space, becoming, trying out various thoughts, various imaginings. And the result of this new relationship will be in the making of her, that in some way she will become much more than she was. She will know aspects of herself, in a way create aspects of herself that are now latent, that are now have no real place. Now, what I want to move on to right away then, leaving out the Rambam, who has a very different description of what the process of the discovery of God was for Avraham, a purely philosophical, intellectual process, which in the past we have looked at, and go straight on to number 6, the Mea Sheloach. God said to Avraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha. Begins with a kind of preamble. Nothing really to do with the present situation, Avram's situation. Something from Yeshayahu about God's pouring water on the thirsty person and fluids on dry ground. That is, we're talking here about a connection between dryness and liquid, being dry, being thirsty, and a subjectivity that now knows itself by suddenly having water poured into it. That is, something has happened to me, which is water has been projected on my dryness. It's like the bride who's going into a situation where something is going to happen to her, which will give her a new sense of herself. It will create her as someone who was dry and then knew what it was to become moistened, and who will react to that situation, presumably by becoming fertile. Yes, once the earth is moistened, then it can become fertile. And there will be a sense somewhere in the earth of knowing and appreciating what has been done to her. That's the situation of the bride. That's the situation of Avraham. Avraham, who is to be the father of many nations, is here gendered feminine, right? He's gendered as a woman, as the earth that is dry and that waits for something active to happen from the outside, a kind of passivity, but it's an active passivity. Open yourself to that. Look, listen, pay attention to something that's going to change everything radically. Now, the Mea Shiloach is talking here about a certain opening that Abraham is capable of, an opening to the recognition of God, to a relationship with God. And this is not purely an intellectual affair. It's not just that he's worked out, as the Rambam has put it. It's not just that he's worked out that all the spheres of the heaven keep moving and circling around. Who makes them move? So it's all about out there. What's happening out there in the world? Avraham is not the question he asks isn't about what's out there. What makes the universe keep circling or rotating? It's a question, and it's a deeply troubled question about himself. It's a question about himself. How does the Meir Shiloach put it? Right there in the Ka'asher, it's in the second line. When Abraham began to seek and quest after the root of his own life, of his own aliveness, I want to translate it. It's not how he came to be alive. It's his sense of being alive, his vitality. He's looking for the root of it. Where does it come from? Where does it draw sustenance? Where does it draw nourishment? And this was after he had already rejected and eliminated all the pleasures of the world as the root of life. You know, when I'm looking for what gives me a feeling of life, there are all the pleasures of the world, all the sense experiences, and he's come to the conclusion that all these cannot be called life, that these are instrumental. Right? You need them in order not to be hungry and not to be thirsty and not to be lonely and not to be, right? So that you can be someone who can experience this quest. And the quest now is for the root of his life. Chaim amitiyim, true aliveness. It's not just the fact of being alive, it's the sense of being alive, right? That moment-to-moment sense of being alive. Guf hachayim, he goes on to say, the body of life. Now, it's not necessarily physical, but the image is of a physical body alive. God then said to him, Lech lecha, which means go to yourself, literally, le'atzmecha. Go towards yourself. Pay attention to yourself. Because the ikar hachayim, the root of your life, the core of your life, what's most important in your life, you will find in yourself. Not out there, not in all the circling spheres, and not even in God as out there, but as something in yourself. In what? Look how you are troubled. Hitzites, I love. This is perhaps the most piercing insight of the Me'er Shiloach. He says, when the Midrash says Hitzites, I love, it should really say perhaps Hitzites elav. He looked. God looked at him, as we would say. God looked at him. That means it's all in the look. We're interested only in the one who's looking. But instead it says he looked upon him. That is, it's reflexive. The look says to Abraham, look at yourself. If you want to find some way of relating to me, you have to look at yourself. In yourself, you will find Shoresh Achaim. In what? Look, you are the only one. Aren't you surprised at this Pele? He uses the word Pele. Aren't you surprised at this wonder, this strangeness of your experience? That no one else seems to be troubled by what you are troubled by. You look around, everyone's quite happy. They're all carrying on with their lives, mimakom lemakom, and it doesn't bother them. And only you are in trouble. Only you are confused. You have a sense of disorder. You have a sense of the incoherence of life. You're troubled by that. Perhaps you should first of all become aware of the pele, of the wonder. Pay attention to your negative state, to your state of being in quest of something that you can't find. The Me'er Shiloach, interestingly, associates Avraham historically with Dor Haflaga, with the generation that built the Tower of Babel, right? In a larger sense, which was the generation that was thrown into dire confusion, right? God mixed up their languages and they couldn't understand one another, and you had chaos, basically, which in a way is a return to the Mabul situation in a different form. Not the clarity and sovereignty of a tower going up, a sense of privilege and of understanding and of knowing something, but rather this general mess, the general mess of the Dor Haflaga. And Abraham not only lives in that generation, but his sense of himself is of being positioned himself in that kind of incoherence. That's his sense of himself. Now, this is a very original way of looking at Abraham. Partly, I think it's really there in the Me'er Shiloach. It's there also in another source that that I didn't put on your page, and that is the student of the Me'er Shiloach, who was Rabbi Tzadok Cohen, particularly in one of his Svarim, Tzidkat HaTzadik, in one passage where he talks about the experience of Abraham as one of really very much like his teacher, very similar to the teacher. If you look at the end of the Me'er Shiloach here, Lo yiksha, 3 lines from the end. Look at yourself, become aware of your own subjectivity. For no one else in the world finds it hard, has questions, is deeply troubled, and not one of them takes it to heart, really pays attention and asks, Mi asazot? Who made this world? Mi asazot? Who made this world, which is so incoherent, which is so disordered? It's on fire, basically, right? It's coming apart at the seams. Now, that sense of the world, right, which is one that is not too strange, perhaps now for many of us, a sense of disorder and of not making sense. And the Me'er Shiloach wants to urge Abraham to become aware that that is his reality. And it's out of that sense of disorder. It's out of that sense of not knowing the figure from the ground, of not knowing exactly where to put his. It's out of that sense of suddenly someone calling on me. That someone calls me from out of that situation, not from elsewhere. It's all burning. But from out of that situation, someone is calling me by name. calling me by name and making me stop in my tracks and stopping me from arresting me from just my routine life and asking me to pay attention. And to pay attention means to look and to listen and to respond. That is a sense of attention, which involves tension, and a sense of responsibility. That there's something I suddenly realize that I am being called upon to do something about my own situation in the world, about what I feel inside myself and what I feel out there. And that would mean then that in coming into connection with God, the Midrash likes to say, and the Rambam says, Avraham hikir et HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There was a certain point in his life in which he knew God. He knew God philosophically, he came to the conclusion there must be a prime mover who moves all the spheres, but with Rambam actually dates it. When he was 40 years old, he knew God. That's nice and factual, and we know what to, right? It's very conscious. The Mea Shiloach is taking us into the disorder of the unconscious. Right? This is Avraham as the self that dreams. Right? The self that dreams is not an orderly self. It's a confused self. It's sometimes a nightmare self. It's a self that knows that there are I don't know how I fit into the larger picture. Here I'm wandering in the world and I'm not sure. As a part of the whole, do I exist as a part in the whole? And God is saying to him, look at yourself, become aware of that in yourself that is lost. And that's when Abraham becomes a subject. A subject is not someone who thinks of himself or herself as being perfectly organized in this view. A self is someone who begins to realize how all in pieces I am, how there's this and there's that and there's that, and I'm not sure that anything is in its right place. That's very important, it seems. The ground against which a figure can emerge. Turns out that sometimes the ground is the story. That one has to work with that ground. It's the thirsty ground that's important. Only then you can talk about the water falling on the ground. But if you haven't taken seriously the dryness and the thirstiness and the confusion as being the truth, as being a reality, then how can there deeply and intimately be a connection with God? And that's on some level, that's what he's saying. There's a wonder here about the fact of being a self. And there's also an agitation, a feeling of being full of questions, unanswered questions. And the Mea Shiloach finishes this passage by talking about that if you're in this situation, then from that kind of trouble and agitation, haramot libcha, you will be able to conjecture that there surely is a creator who is in some way bearing the world and filling the world. He's inside and outside the world. Right? He's in you and he's outside you. So there's a sense now not just of God as a thing out there in the castle calling out to him and glancing at him, but there's a kind of, particularly in himself, there is that deep connection with God, which comes out of the confusion. Now, Avram has to discover that. God is the one who has now aroused your heart and your soul at the end there to become aware of this. So your awareness, your capacity to pay attention to yourself, that is God. Now, not simple, right? God as having everything to do, if I can put it like this, with one's emotional states, with one's moods, and put it like that, that somewhere there one looks for God. One doesn't just wait for one feels happier. To say, order, light, beauty, I can see things clearly, that's God. One looks for God in these shadowy places. That's where God emerges, where one is full of questions, and the question itself, the confusion itself, is already a kind of answer. It's more than the beginning of an answer. It's the ground of an answer. It's these are not obvious ideas. Rabbi Tzadok says, "Ata be'atzmecha gam ken michlal balabira." Very daring reading. You, Avraham, you in yourself, too, belong to what is meant by Baal Habira, the owner of the castle. You contain in yourself the Ani Baal Habira. The voice that says, I am the owner of the castle, is your Ani. That there's something in you which is God in you. His Shekhinah is in your heart. Right? Rabbi Tzadok says it, the Ishbur says it just slightly less daringly. It's the one way, Rabbi Tzadok says, it's the most immediate way, or it's not the highest way, but it's the most immediate way in which we can come to know God. Darga da'ani, he calls it. It's the level of through my subjectivity. That it's through looking in the truth of who I am when I'm really there that I come to know God. Now, let's move on rather fast since time is escaping us. I want to look now at number 7, and this will pick up some of the themes that we've been talking about. God said to Avram, we're still with Lech Lecha. Right? We're not going to move away from that. Rabbi Brachia began teaching, and he quoted from Shir HaShirim about how your fine ointments, your oils, yield a sweet fragrance, right? The sweet fragrance coming from your oils, shemen turak shemecha, your oils, balsam oil, the translation says. It's not exactly perfume, but it's balsam oil, which is fragrant. And you have the sweet perfume coming from there, and your name gives forth finest. Right. Finest oil is your name. Your name is finest oil. And suddenly we have that verse from by the lover to the beloved in Shir HaShirim. It's a love story. Rabbi Brachia comments here, what was Avraham like? Avraham was like a flask of balsamic oil. That is some kind of fragrant oil, which was tightly corked and wedged in a corner so that the fragrance didn't become in the world. The fragrance is purely theoretical. It's an almost nothing, a few drops of something inside a bottle. Nothing to talk about. But when they uncorked the flask, and waved it around a bit, right? Tiltila, once you wave it around, you agitate the flask, then the perfume goes out into the world, rechonodef, and there's a wafting of the perfume, and which will then affect the world. That is Avraham. God said to Avraham, you see, there's no holds barred in these midrashim. Starting from Lech Lecha, look where the imagination of the Chachamim takes them, because there's no other way to say this. If they could have said it other ways, they might have said it other ways, but this is their way of saying it. And it's just for us to try to get hold of some of that perfume, to understand what they're trying to say by talking about things that seem insignificant, flasks of perfume. And God said to Abraham, shake yourself up, agitate yourself, open yourself and agitate yourself, taltel, in the world, from one place to another, and your name will become great in the world. You will become valued in the world because you've had an experience of being confused, of being agitated, of being, you've been shaken up. You've been shaken up. You're in a situation of confusion, of loss. And in that situation, you will be your perfume, your inner experience will waft out to the world, and there will be a certain value that you will give hope to other people too. That somewhere that you are responding to a certain mission, and somewhere that will have an effect on the world. So this is Abraham as as a bottle of perfume. And mitaltel, I just want to read a list. I looked up the word taltel to get a sense of the range of meanings, and it's really quite fascinating. Basically, it means to move around, not to be static, but to move around. If you're static, you're like the bottle of perfume that's just plugged up and it's just sinking in its own lees. It's not doing anything. But to become perfume, to become what one is, it's an act of love. And an act of love involves movement. So there has to be movement. So here is the list of translations for taltel. To swing, to hurl, to be in exile, road fatigue, taltelet, to be shaken up, to be confused, to be distraught, to be deranged. Now, these are not all happy experiences. I would say the taltiltul is on the whole not a happy experience. If you are the one who is being metultal, it's shaken up. Right? To lose one's balance, to be homeless, to be banished, to be decentered, not to find the center, be disordered. Now, all these are now become a way of describing Avraham's state of being, which could be all bottled up and have no effect, and which now God says, Lech Lecha. Appreciate your own singularity, that you are the one who is the most confused. And appreciate that confusion and what it may give birth to. So let it affect other people in the same way. Next passage. A dynamic here. The dynamic of being incomplete, confused, not perfectly unified, not integrated, and how some kind of integration can grow out of the recognition of that reality. Yes, I wanted to quote something here. Quotation, the pasuk from Micha, the prophet Micah. Ki eshev b'choshech Hashem orli. Even though I sit in darkness, God is a light to me, right? That's one way of translating it, probably the most obvious. Even though I sit in darkness, God is a light to me. That's the kind of obvious meaning, that God is somehow external to me, and he provides me some light in my darkness. But the Yalkut, the Midrash on this pasuk, reads like this. Ilmale yashavti b'choshech, lo haya Hashem orli. If I had not been sitting in darkness, God would not be my light. That is, the necessary condition for God being a light is that I know the full reality of darkness, of the shadows, of the not knowingness. Only then, in darkness, can I perhaps see a glimmer, see a gleam, something that can then call on me and evoke something in me, evoke a response from me and a relationship of some kind. And that would be then a very imaginative rendering of Lech Lecha. Those simple words, go and bring yourself into play in your reality, not in a kind of ecstatic vision, but in the reality of your life. The next passage, next midrashic passage, number 8. Lecha tal yaldutecha. To you, this is from Psalms, to you is the dew of your youth. What was Avraham Avinu like? Again, we're going to have another metaphor coming up. Avraham was afraid. He was anxious, mitbached. And he said, he's in a situation of anxiety. He's all torn apart. He says, Tomar, would you say? Now that's Avraham's key code. That's the way he starts many of the things he says in the Midrash. Would you say? In other words, is this the way it is? Is that how life is? Is this what I'm supposed to say? Tomar, would you say that I have in my hand sin because I used to worship idols all those years. Now, suddenly we have an Avraham who is troubled by the fact that he once was an idol worshiper before Lech Lecha, that he was someone who was totally confused. He was totally, lost, as it were. Maybe that sin still stays with him all through his life. If he once had it, then maybe it doesn't go away. In some way, it's still part of him. It's a real question. And so he's troubled. And God answers him strangely. To you is the dew of your youth. It belongs to you. Just as dew, poreach, evaporates, diffuses, so your sins evaporate. Just as dew is a sign of blessing to the world, so you are a sign of blessing to the world. Now, what is this strange analogy? That your sins are like dew. That the sins, just as dew evaporates, okay, so your sins have evaporated. All right, so no more sins. So what makes you a sign of blessing to the world? How does that work? You had this unfortunate period of idol worship. What happened to it? How are we supposed to, what is God telling Abraham here in this midrash? Have a look at the Talmud in number 9, put it all together. Rabbi Brachia talks about the fact that Knesset Yisrael, Jewish people, asked for something that was unreasonable in the book of Hosea. And God answered with a reasonable response. What was unreasonable? The people ask, let us go and pursue the knowledge of God. Right? We're all passionate about acquiring the knowledge of God, just like which is as sure God is as sure in his coming forth as the morning. As the morning will rise, we're sure we can find God as somewhere as an entity out there in the world. Let's go in pursuit of God. God as a quest out there. And the people are then talking about God as Geshem, like rain upon us. Vayavo kageshem lanu. Let him come like rain to us. And that is an unreasonable request, to ask for God to be rain. Why? God answers, my daughter, again gendered, you are asking for something that is sometimes desirable and sometimes not desirable. I will be to you, now quoting again from Hosea, Aval ani eheyeh lecha davar hamitbakesh la'olam. I will be to you something that is always wanted, always in existence. What is that? As it says, Eheye katal Yisrael. I will be like dew for Israel. You are wrong. You are unreasonable to ask for God to be like rain. I'll teach you how to want. What should you really be wanting? You should be wanting God to be like dew. Now, what's the difference? What is it that the analogy of Abraham and his sins and his sinful state, his previous state of being one large question mark, of just not knowing where in the world he belongs, what piece of the puzzle he constitutes, the sense of disorder. Perhaps that's in some way still his condition. And God says to him, no, that those sins of your youth are lecha tal yaldutecha. They have been the making of you. Your subjectivity was created by that period of your life, that troubled period, which it turns out is not altogether behind him. But let's just stay stage by stage. Right? We have one more important source here, the Shem Nishmoel, 19th century Hasidic commentary on the Torah, who says this: what is the difference between rain and dew? It's his commentary on this passage in the Talmud. The difference is, third line, that when rain falls, it thoroughly soaks the earth, v'nish arba, and stays in the earth. In other words, it inundates the earth, And it really sits there in the earth as an otherness which comes and sits there. Something has come from the outside and sits here. And God answers, no, that would be no good. Because then the human being would have no role in the situation. You would have no part to play in this. You would be passive, and God would be sending his moisture down and sitting in you, as some kind of foreign body that comes and all right, it makes you moist, and maybe it's in some way gratifying, or maybe it's too much. But it's certainly not you making anything machmat atzmam that comes out of you, and that's a severe deficiency. That's not what we want, something that doesn't come out of you. We want something that comes from elsewhere. But dew, what does dew do? This dew does no more than arouse the inner moisture of the grass. What a wonderful expression. Dew falls, it's barely perceptible. You can hardly see it as it's falling, and you can hardly see it. You have to look close to see the little beads of dew sometimes on the grass if you're up early enough. But if you're up a little later, you actually don't see anything. You just see suddenly the grass looks flourishing. It's nice and green. And in that sense, the dew has been almost a nothing. It's a no thing, like the drop of perfume that diffuses out into the world, micronizes out into the world. But it's a nothing that arouses something in you. And that's what your sins have been for you. A very nice reading. That your sins in some way, all right, all your confusions, have been ways in which you've been investing in things that in the end seem empty. In the end, you realize that it doesn't arouse anything in me. It doesn't really connect with anything deep in me. And in that sense, that period of confusion and of not knowing, right, that period is actually the source of your life, of your sense. If you hadn't had that period, you wouldn't have looked through that experience for something that calls to you from the midst of the experience. What comes out to you from the midst of the experience and calls your name and says, become aware of yourself as having in yourself the root of your own life, which we call Hashem. This is God as something that's known internally and that recreates Abraham as a new kind of subject, a subject who's self-conscious of something that's beyond his very limited subjectivity, something that can look for what is wondrous about himself. So Avraham Avinu, at the end of the Shem Mishmuel, Avraham Avinu worshipped idols at the beginning, and then he realized that the idols were nothing. He felt the emptiness of it. And so he shifts his attention, and he's looking then for what that evokes in him. The sense of emptiness evokes something in him, and that's the attempt to hear the unheard voice, to see the unseen presence of God. Lihidavek, to cling, dvekut, the desire to cling to something that is him and isn't him, right? It's in him, but it's something that stops him in his tracks. We call it God. There's something in him that is strange to him, doesn't belong to him, and then it becomes something that he embraces. He nitkarev v'nidbak b'Hashem yitbarach. He calls it the nekuda hapnimit shebelibo, something, the innermost dot in his heart, which has no dimensions at all. That is the presence of God in his heart, and that's what, in the end, he comes to recognize. Now, this miniaturizing of the presence of God, the presence of God becomes a drop of dew, something that you have to agitate to make it effective. You have to bring it into being. You have to create what's most true to yourself. You have to create it, which means in some way to recognize the necessity for it. and to recognize its very tiny existence, right? Its existence, which has an arousing effect rather than a sense of another who is outside yourself. The Sfat Emet, I wanted to finish with this, deals with the question that really we've been dealing with all along. Why does God choose Avram? We have no actual evidence in the text that Avram was particularly distinguished, he was particularly spiritual. He was one of his generation. Echad haya Avraham. Avraham was one, singular, but not obviously living a different kind of life from everyone else. So Ramban raises the question, and the Sfat Emet, 19th century Hasidic commentary, says this then. He raises the problem, Mikodem, God chooses Abraham, even though there is no mention before of chibato. We're back to that word chiba, chaviv. There's no mention about Abraham's being particularly lovable, being particularly special, that he was different from other people. Nothing, no hint of that. He was just someone who was the son of someone else, and he traveled, and he had a wife, and all kinds of, immediate circumstances of his life. And here he's going to try to say something again in this rather paradoxical way, which we have to deal with. He says, this itself is his praise, is his virtue. This is what's special about him. This is his chibah. This is his lovableness. What was it? That he heard the words, lech lecha. He heard the call, lech lecha, which is said from God to all people always. And suddenly, what we'd assumed to be the most important thing in the story becomes the ground of the story. The most important thing in the story is that God addresses Avram and says, Lech lecha. And everything else, everyone else is just the background of the story. And the Sfat Emet says, no. The figure in the story is, what's important is that God says to everyone, Lech lecha. Everyone is potentially Echad Haya Avraham, but no one hears the voice. You're the only one. Strange, isn't it? Oddly, you're the one that hears. Yeah, it's almost the kind of sense of humor you need to read this Sfat Emet. Isn't that really odd? That you are the one who was sensitized somehow to hear this. That is the Shevach. The Shevach is, the Chibah is that you felt so completely unlovable. And you were unaware there was anything special about that. That you were somehow aware of the confusion in yourself. You were aware of that, and you were troubled by it. And that's what makes you able to speak to other people. Because what you're speaking to them somewhere out of that particular process. And in that sense, other people can also recognize that something in themselves. You're teaching them to be aware somewhere of the Lech Lecha in their own lives. Meantime, Abraham is the only one. It's the only one that God was speaking to. Vayomer Hashem el Avram Lech lecha. It sounds as if he was addressing it particularly to Avram, but there's the paradox. It only turns out that he was the only one he was speaking to. At first, God is basically, in principle, God is saying it to everyone. But Avram makes himself into the one to whom God was speaking by opening his ears. And the idea comes from the Zohar, actually. The idea of actually opening the ears. And that would mean, again, it would again raise that issue of the creative aspect of the recognition of God, of the connection with God. That if I didn't have open ears, I would never hear. It's in a sense, I'm engaged in a certain process. Okay. Yes, I think I'll stop there. We're beyond time. Yes. Joe, you wanted to say something?
Thank you so much.
Have you unmuted yourself?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Now
Is that
I
better?
can hear you. Yes.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. I had a question about connected to last week. You mentioned kind of the story of the Dor HaFlaga would set us up for Avram, and I can see a lot of the resonances. But you mentioned about the kind of the way in which people spread, like Shratzim,
Yes,
and how Avraham would have a different approach to that in some way. Perhaps is that what you said? Perhaps
yeah.
I guess I wanted to just ask you to like share a little bit about that. I would love to know more in relation to the stuff we've done in today.
Yes, I think it's actually quite connected in a paradoxical way. That is, what the people of the Dar HaFlaga thought that they could save themselves by not obeying God's desire, which is lemalot, to fill the world, to go out and fill space, and to fill, and lishrotz, v'shirtzuba. So God now forces them, as it were, he persuades them by mixing up their languages to live this horizontal life, right? This life that's spread out all over. But it's a life of confusion. There's no getting over that. You know, people don't understand each other's language. I don't know where I belong in the right. One can take this on any level possible. I take it on the most personal level, because it's easiest for me to think about it, about very personal feelings that young people have, especially as a young person. I don't seem to belong in the world. Why am I like this? Why have I been made, a feeling that is not at all obvious? I don't live in a tower, splendid ivory tower, in which it's very obvious that I'm really it. On the contrary, I'm spread thin on the ground. Everything else is around me. I don't know where to look, outside or inside. And that Abraham, in some way, this is what's so extraordinary, I think, about this tradition of Ishbitz, of the Meah Shiloach, and then Rabbi Tzadok especially. There is this acknowledgement that somewhere inside the phenomenology, inside the howness of me, how I am in the world, which I'm not very happy about some of the time. Again, especially young people are not at all happy about how they are. Right? There's a lot of trouble about fitting into the world. And then there is a question about perhaps you don't have to fit. Somewhere you fit, but perhaps you don't fit. And that also is a wonder, that maybe you are more qualified to see certain things because you don't fit. Right? So I think that's the issue that we're talking about here. And that for Avraham, Echad Haya Avraham, right? That's Yecheskel, I think, yeah. Or Yeshayahu, sorry, I've forgotten the pasuk. Also, the idea of his singularity. He is singular, and he has a singular event of Lech Lecha, in which he has to leave this bad part of his life behind, apparently. But I think actually what these midrashim are saying is that this is a lifelong quest. That the Lech Lecha moment isn't something he goes through, and then he's found his answer, and then he can proceed on to do other things. On the contrary, the Lech Lecha it's woven into the fabric of his life. And there will always be Ela Aretz Asher Reka. There will always be a sense at any point in life, it doesn't really go away. A very young sense, if you will, which is sometimes difficult, of, well, where do I actually belong? Why am I made the way I'm made? And it's almost an impersonal sense. God could have made me in many different ways. I am as I am, and no other way. No other way. And it's that question. And Abraham being aroused, finding arousal to find the answer in the problem. To find the answer in the problem. Look at you. There's something to love or to appreciate or to value about how you are. And call that God. Call that God looking at you and saying, look at you. So it's a kind of cycle. There's a strangeness inside us. Within us, there's a strangeness. It's not out. All the strangeness is not outside. There's plenty strange outside. But there's a strangeness inside us. as well. The inner stranger, call it the unconscious. No, the self that dreams. What is that? That me? It's a very different me. And then somewhere the sense that that's the depths of the matter. That's what leads us to look at those paintings in different ways. Not just on one level of attention, what I'm aware of when I'm all dressed up and ready to go. But there's other things. And that can be a source of illumination, can be a source of, being touched by the fragrance. That something arouses us in that. Something engages us.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Avivah.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you very much. We'll never look at Lech Lecha again the same way.